some call an internet battlefield? How has new media affected people's perception of what has happened in the country? And from this, we hope to gain a greater understanding of the major role that new media technologies played in the events leading up to and following the recent Iranian elections. Before we introduce our panelists, we want to mention another event that CIMA will be hosting this week. On Thursday, we will hold a lunchtime panel on our report, Sword and Shield, Self-Regulation and International Media. We will look at whether press councils and ombudsmen are effective in raising journalistic standards, or if they too easily can become tools for government to manipulate the news, especially in places where democracies are fragile. And if you would like to be added to our email list for information on future events, please leave your business card in the basket at the front. And I would also like to note that we have a cheat sheet on new media in Iran that we have made up here on the CIMA staff. I would now like to introduce our moderator for this afternoon, Richard Kramer. Richard is the NED Program Officer covering Afghanistan, Iran, and Turkey. Prior to joining the endowment, he served as an officer at CIPE, the Center for International Private Enterprise, where he supervised the organization's advocacy and corporate governance programs in the Levant, Turkey, Iran, and Afghanistan. He spent 2 years for CIPE in Kabul, where he was technical advisor to the Afghanistan International Chamber of Commerce. A member of the New York State Bar Association with his law degree from American University, Richard has researched and taught commercial law in Poland from 2002 to 2004. And with that, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Marguerite. Good afternoon and welcome. It's very encouraging to see the turnout today. I'm looking forward to what I believe is going to be a lively and interesting discussion about new media in pre- and post-election Iran. We don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to begin with a brief introduction of our guests today. Our first speaker, directly to my right, is Mr. Robert Ferris. He is the Research Director of the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard University. His research focuses on the interaction of online speech, government regulations of the Internet, and political processes. He's also a contributor to OpenNet Initiative, studying Internet censor policy throughout the world. His recent publications include Reading Twitter in Tehran, Mapping the Arabic Blogosphere, Politics, Culture, and Dissent, and Madison and the Smart Mob, The Promise and Limitations for the Internet and Democracy. Today, Robert's presentation will focus on the overall impact of new media in pre- and post-election environment in Iran. Our second panelist will be Andrew Luhman, who is the Executive Director of the Tor Project, a nonprofit organization that provides research and free software that protects users' online privacy and anonymity. Andrew manages the Tor Project's business operations, support, and advocacy roles, while also serving on its board of directors. He is an ethologist by training, and his experience spans a variety of business fields. In addition to conducting research on animal communication behavior, he has worked for multinational companies in Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. Today, Andrew will focus on the Iranian government's attempt to block the use of new media before and after the election, and how new media users fought back and attempted to get around government censorship. Our third speaker will be Sam Sadeh, who is the director of the Iran program at Nonviolence International and a regular international affairs contributor to the Huffington Post. Sam lived in Tehran until 1919 when he turned 16. When he turned 16, after which he came to the United States to get his degree in economy and political science. He revisited Iran during 2005 presidential elections to do research on the social and economic issues that related to what he saw as a revolution in the works. Sam has appeared on CNN, BBC, Voice of America, and Air America Radio, amongst others. And today we'll be discussing how recent events will affect the future of democracy in Iran. Initially, we had Mr. Bahman Kalbasi of the BBC Persian Service in D.C. to speak today. However, he was unable to join us at the last moment. But certainly more so in his stead, we're very pleased to have as our final panelist today Satare Derakhshesh, who is the lead anchor of News and Views, a 2-hour daily news and information television program distributed to Iran by the Voice of America Persian News Network. Setareh is a Iranian native who holds a PhD in political science from the University of Paris in France, and she joined Voice of America in 1993. Previously, she was a director of Roundtable with You, a daily TV radio program in Persian, and also the editor for Mehregan, a professional journal dealing with Iranian issues. Today, Setareh's presentation will focus on the relationship between traditional and new media in Iran and how our perception of what is happening in the country is being affected by new media. Our last announcement before you hear from Robert, we'll be recording this workshop on video, and it will be available at CIMA's website within the coming days. During our question and answer period, two people will be bringing around cordless microphones to allow you to engage with our speakers. And without further ado, I turn the floor to Robert.
Thank you so much, Richard. It's a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank the organizers, CIMA and the National Endowment for Democracy, for the opportunity to speak with you today about this fascinating topic. Voice is okay? You can hear me? Wonderful. As the academic representative here, I want to give a simple little framework for thinking about this, which I hope will help clarify some of the issues related to social media in Iran. So 3 things I want to touch on today. One is the distinction between information sharing and community organizing using social media. These are a lot of overlap between the two of them, but for convenience sake, I want to separate the two. News reporting, getting news out, facts out, information sharing, I find to be a very different process from organizing communities online, and I'll talk about that more in a moment. The other thing I want to talk about is the impact of the architecture of social network and communication infrastructure, particularly the difference between centralized versus decentralized networks, and lastly about the role of government, which is critical, as we'll see here. So social media is obviously a very, very powerful tool. We want to remember that it is only a tool and no more than a tool. But when it's allowed to prosper and flourish, it's a very, very powerful tool. We've seen in instances where traditional media is tightly controlled that online media and social media can have a huge impact on the course of events. I think the best example of that is the election last year in Malaysia, which hasn't seen a lot of airplay, but traditional media is tightly controlled, and the party which eventually took control in Malaysia took the online space and used it very, very effectively. Related to the organizing potential, certainly the Obama campaign is kind of the quintessential example of that. The ability of using social media to aggregate and collect and support groups of like-minded individuals is really remarkable. And again, it's a tool for doing so. I think that is well established. Where you let social media flourish, it can be a tool to reduce the cost and create great efficiencies, either in channeling energies and raising funds or just organizing overall political movements. We don't know as much about the ability of social media to change minds. I think the jury is still out on that. Because of its distributed nature, governments that seek to control social media are going to have a harder time with it. The multiple sources of information are very, very different. If you want to question a story in the New York Times, you know exactly who to call up. If you want to ask about a video on YouTube, it's much more difficult to find the source to do that. So we think of social media as a highly distributed network, which makes it harder to control. Yet paradoxically, most social media has a central node. So in the case of Iran, we've seen the shutdown of Facebook on multiple occasions over the past couple of years, and you block one website and you take the whole thing down. Similarly, if you block YouTube, you've taken a huge amount of wealth of information offline in one stroke. So we have this paradoxical decentralization distributed network with one that's in fact very, very centralized. The other aspect of social media, which I think is worthy of note, is that social media combines many different things. It combines entertainment, it combines social networking, it combines economic activity, and it combines politics. So governments that want to take social media out of the picture, the only real opportunity, the choice they have, is to block it entirely, as we've seen in many instances around the world. In doing so, however, it's a costly maneuver for these governments. The cost in terms of economic activity, in terms of legitimacy of the government, is very, very high when you block Facebook or block YouTube. The other aspect of this, which I find very, very interesting, is that blocking individual pieces of information from sources to destinations is nearly impossible in this newly networked age. That if someone wants to get an idea out, it's very easy to propagate that idea and spread that idea. The thing that is easy to knock out is what I think is the more powerful aspect of the internet and social media, is the organizing capacity of it. The Obama campaign, again, is the prime example of that. When we shift to Iran, certainly long-term political change requires political organization. And to the fact that you can knock this out online through surveillance, through monitoring, through blocking, makes it appear that this aspect of social media, the community organizing, the political organizing aspect, is very, very fragile. And we've seen that come down over the last few days. A couple more points. So let me just push that off to the side. The community organizing aspect of online media, very, very important before the election. I would say right now it's almost dead in the water, and we can say that there's little to no impact of online media in that aspect right now in Iran. Outside of Iran, I think that's part of the untold story here that hasn't gotten the attention it deserves. The community that's come together outside of Iran to aggregate information and push that information out to new media and traditional media alike, I think has been astounding. And that, to me, is a much more important story that's out there than Twitter has been. Reporting on the internet, the rules of reporting aren't any different than they used to be. Good reporting still relies upon the accuracy of reporting, the salience of reporting, the timeliness of reporting. Those things in online media we have seen, and they do occur. They don't occur necessarily in Twitter. Certainly Twitter is timely. In many cases it's salient. It's much harder to get the credibility and accuracy out of Twitter that we have in traditional media. I don't want to paint a broad stroke and say that's true of all online media, but the way that we get this in online media now is through a persistent presence. Bloggers spend many years of their lives building up credibility and reporting the news, aggregating the news, and in doing so they build a reputation for accuracy and for reporting the facts and for salience. And we haven't cracked that yet with Twitter. It's going to be the distributed nature of Twitter makes it very, very hard to block. The distributed nature of Twitter is also a downside of Twitter, and that perhaps in aggregate, these tweets, put them all together, they mean something and we can extract some information out of them. But even that is muddied by a lot of disinformation that's going on there. So I guess in summary, there's really a lot of material here, and we really need to get into the weeds to figure out what has been valuable and what hasn't been valuable here. I think the Twitter story has been greatly exaggerated. It's very, very interesting. It's fascinating. I think it's played an important role. It's contributed. But there's other things that are far more important in the Iranian situation here. And I think I'll pass it on to others to tell us more about that. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Robert. With that, we'll be following a presentation from Andrew here that's going to be on PowerPoint. So we'll be evacuating the stage for momentarily. And this will be immediately followed by Sam, who will be also giving a PowerPoint presentation today. So.
While they're gathering the seats, can everyone hear me? I also talk loud, so if the mic doesn't work, you never know the difference. I'm Andrew Luman from the Tor Project. How many people have heard of Tor? How many people understand what Tor actually is? I'm going to give everyone a crash course in Tor. Should I be waiting for this thing to appear? Okay. So anyway. No? Okay.
No. Yep.
There you go. Yeah, I'll jump back 2 slides so you can all see. There you go. So this is the outline. I'm going to do all this in 15 minutes. My goal is to spend most of the time on TOR in Iran. But in order to understand why TOR matters and why I've been invited here, and thank you to CIMA and National Endowment for Democracy for having me on the panel. So we're going to go to the crash course in anonymity and what anonymity is online. This is not anonymity. These are questions about anonymity. Formally, there's a huge mathematical definition for it that I've spared everyone. It takes up 2 slides. There's a lot of research on this. In essence, it comes down to Alice and Bob can't have their communications watched. Someone watching the communication doesn't know who Alice is and that she's talking to Bob. Anonymity is not cryptography. People seem to confuse this a lot. Cryptography is just protecting the contents of the message. You still know on all your U.S. mail, your postman knows exactly who sent the letter and who it's going to. Otherwise, he wouldn't get it to your house. What's inside it, hopefully he doesn't open it and look. That's cryptography. Steganography is the ability to hide information in the communications so that you could be looking at, a normal picture. In that picture are instructions on how to get to your grandmother's house. Strong steganography is sort of, doesn't really exist. Many people are looking into it, but it's a difficult field to work on. Anonymity isn't wishful thinking. If you're trusting that others won't prove it to you, they won't promise they look, just because you didn't write your name on it doesn't mean you're anonymous. There are plenty of ways to find out who you are, that it was you, and that other parties don't always honor what they say they do. Proof is a strong word. I'm going to harp on this because statistics are very good. Over time, someone will figure out who you are. I have one of those those Google phones. I signed up with an anonymous account. I'll guarantee you Google knows who I am, even though they've never seen any of my contacts, never seen anything. Based on where I live, where the cell phone signal is, and who I call, pretty sure Google can pretty much figure out I'm Andrew Lumen of the TOR Project. It's not that tough. They have the benefit of time. Over the past 6 months, I've had the phone. They've had a lot of contact points to look at me. Anonymity serves different interests for different user groups. We designed TOR originally to protect private citizens so that you have some control over what you do online and what you share online. By default, your operating system, your browsers, everything you do wants to share information. This can be good, this can be bad. For businesses, it's network security. They don't really need so much privacy. They definitely need to worry about who's watching, what they're doing, how they're doing. What do patent attorneys Google for at IBM? What do ad networks collect about you? For blocked users, which is the topic of the day, it's reachability. The properties that provide anonymity also provide the ability to circumvent firewalls. And not everyone wants to take down their government. I know plenty of people who work for banks and financial institutions who just want to get to Gmail so they can see what time they have to pick their kid up from soccer. They can't do that because Gmail is blocked by their firewall, so they use Tor to do that. For governments, they don't really need so much privacy. They don't care about, they care about network security, but they have lots of smart people and lots of people with guns to protect their security. They don't need to circumvent because they're the government and they make the laws. And they need traffic analysis resistance. They care very much about who's watching who talks to who. If you are a Navy investigator in Baghdad, you get lots of training about how to blend in, how to do all sorts of stuff with the local community. As soon as you go to your hotel room, you connect back to Navy.mil to get your email. You just told everyone who's watching that connection that you're a Navy officer, and maybe someone should pick you up. Maybe the guy you met in the bar isn't quite the guy you should trust, because he's connecting back to CIA.gov. So many people try to build their own anonymity network. This doesn't work so well, because you then become known for that network. There's a classic story I was told by an NSA ex-director who said that NSA had this phone bank, and they used it up for dial-up for all the 90s. And they assumed they were super secure, and no one would ever figure out that this phone bank was the NSA's. Every organized crime person in the world knew it was the NSA. When a call came in from that, they treated it completely different than if it came in from, AOL or CompuServe. So what do? We create a shared anonymity network so that everyone looks the same. The more the anonymous internet, or Tor, looks like the general internet, the safer Tor is in general. Because you look like everybody else, you don't stand out, and no one will figure out who is who. I've heard from FBI agents who do research, it's very tough to pretend you're a 16-year-old girl in a child porn chat room if you're coming from FBI.gov. Criminals pick up on that really quickly. So the question, the other elephant in the room is, can't bad people use Tor? Sure they can, but they don't need it. They have every incentive possible to try to hide their communications because they're already doing illegal things. If you're willing to break the law, you probably have more anonymity and security than by hacking into my grandmother's computer and installing a botnet than you do in trying to use Tor. IP addresses are plenty to start an identity trail. Over time, your ad networks, what you browse for at Amazon, what you post at Wikipedia, all this stuff will show up. People who have, cable modems, whatever, DSL, your IP address doesn't change all that much. You'll have the same IP address for a long time. My home connections have the same IP address for 8 months, and it's on dynamic changes, and Verizon reserves the right to change it every day. They don't. So that was your crash course on Tor. What actually is Tor? Tor is an online anonymity software and network. It is open source, freely available. We are a very transparent organization. We encourage an active research environment. We encourage people to attack us. That which doesn't kill us makes us stronger. It also gives lots of people press when they say, I can attack Tor in 3 packets, and they find out they did it on their test network on their virtual machines in their laptop. It doesn't quite work on the real network. We are a 501c3. We research and development tools for online privacy and anonymity. The Onion is because we're based on onion routing, and that was developed by the Naval Research Labs in the 90s, and we applied it to the internet. So the thing about an anonymity network is we don't measure our users. We don't know who our users are. Wouldn't it be very anonymous if we asked you to log in and tell us everything about you? So through statistical sampling, we believe we have 300,000 daily Tor users. Lately, that's around 500,000. Many people who've tried Tor will notice Tor is slow because we're overloaded. We accidentally succeeded, everybody came, and now we have to scale. How is Tor different than most proxy providers? Your brother may run that relay, or your mother, or your father, or your grandparents. You may trust them implicitly. That's great. If you can find that, that's awesome. You should use that just as well as Tor. However, just because you trust your person running your relay for you to give you access to outside the country doesn't mean that someone outside them can't watch what you're doing. With a single hop, Alice 1 talking to Bob 3, the people watching that relay know exactly who Alice is talking to, how much she talks to them, and can do lots of traffic analysis and pretty much guess what they're saying. This doesn't help you if you're trying to get the news out from inside a country. Someone who's watching that connection will know who you are and where you were at what time, and then they'll correlate other data points to find out what happens. So what Tor does is we redirect your traffic through 3 different hops or proxy servers. Your Tor client doesn't trust any of the proxies by design, so it does a bunch of mathematics and cryptography to ensure that the relays really are relays and aren't lying to you. And so that Alice can talk to Bob, someone won't know who Alice is or who Bob is, or know that they're talking to each other. So who uses Tor? Everybody does, and this is good. The more we look like the general internet, the stronger we are. Normal people who just don't want to be tracked by DoubleClick or Google or any sort of ad network. People who want the default to say, I'll give you the information when I wanted to give it to you. Law enforcement, I've mentioned FBI. I know many police and DEA who also use Tor to do their undercover operations. 1, to protect themselves. 2, to do better research. 3, to protect their families. It's tough to against organized crime when they can trace your cell phone, buy someone in the corrupt phone company, get your address, and go visit your family. Human rights activists, many of these people have the same issues. Human rights activists are in country trying to work on women's rights or abuse victims or anything, and they have the exact same issues in talking back to their parent organizations. Business execs use a lot of Tor because lawyers frequently do research on each other. Lawyers frequently want to blog about something going on in their life and not have it reflect on their firm. CEOs want to see what the competition is doing, blah, blah, blah. You can imagine all the corporate espionage that they want to protect against. Military do Tor, abuse victims, the Tor.org, Tor users is a great list of people who've actually de-anonymized themselves. So Tor in Iran. I hear there's some people upset about an election. There might be a few million in the square. We have this general anonymity network. Its properties provide great circumvention, and independently, many people picked up on, once Twitter was blocked, once Facebook was blocked, they started using Tor because they realized the Iranian government can set up single hot proxies, squid proxies, just like anybody else can, and they will tweet them, and they will show up, and they'll say, hey, let's watch this IP address, and you now have the person in an internet cafe in Tehran. You have them logging into Twitter, what they posted, how often they posted, what they did, and you can correlate that with video or the officer, the covert officer sitting in the corner writing down everyone's name and face, attributes about you. At first, there were a bunch of hacks. People went and started hacking the Iranian government websites and all sorts of other stuff. Most of these were amateurs. Most people don't want to go hacking your foreign governments because that just gets a stronger response from you. So what happened was, this is June 12th through June 14th. Midnight starts on the left of the 12th. As the protests increased, and Facebook and Twitter and stuff started getting blocked, the Iranian governments, their issue is, we'll just start shutting down the internet. They can't shut down the complete internet because that would anger a whole different class of people. It's one thing to anger a bunch of people trying to do social media and Twitter and Facebook and Yahoo Instant Message. It's complete other if you take down your e-commerce infrastructure and then you just pissed off your entire middle class that's just trying to pay the rent. They may not care about the elections. They care a little bit, but they'll care a whole lot when you shut off their e-commerce site and suddenly they can't pay rent and they start losing their houses. Many governments don't have the internet penetration that Iran does. Iran's at something like 35 to 40% internet penetration. Other governments have no problem just disconnecting the internet as a whole and say, look, these bad people are the reason your internet's disconnected. Go beat at them. This is a bit technical, but here's what was blocked by the Iranian firewall. SSH is a tunneling protocol that a lot of anonymizing or a lot of proxy servers use to try and hide because it doesn't look like HTTP or web browsing. People in government are not stupid. Many hackers think that government people are inept and that they'll never figure it out. They figure out stuff pretty quick. You should assume that they will figure it out. Flash is another fine way to get information out. You use Flash, Flash games is what everyone thinks of, but there are Flash widgets for Twitter. BitTorrent is another fine way to share data. POP is email, and then it just goes down. What you can see is what's important is that these are in the 80s. The 40 to 80% of traffic was blocked. That's a huge percent of traffic. So what did people do? They started running proxies. The darker the green, the more proxies in the country. And these are all things. This is actually from Renesys. And Renesys did analysis and recorded all the tweets and geolocated all the IP addresses that were showing up. People in America, I don't think they're really in Alaska, but because it shows up as U.S. territory. People in America do a lot, ran a lot of proxies. Surprisingly, people in Iran ran proxies for people in Iran. I don't know how that helps, but great. So what did Tor see? There were lots of rumors going on about how Iran was blocking SSL and blocking websites and doing all sorts of stuff. During the time of the heaviest blocking, we saw a huge increase in usage. This is by percent, and you'll notice that Iran doubles and triples China. And China has plenty of its own government people blocking various websites that people need access to the open internet. It was interesting that Iran went from one of our top 100 countries down in like the 75, 76 range to number 15 overnight. And that was June 15th. To give a comparison, new returning Tor clients per day. This is how Iran looked over time. Tor's top 3 usage countries are the U.S., China, and Germany, and Sweden and France, and those are 4 and 5. Again, Iran went from number like 70-something to number 15 really quick. And in comparison, China's usage has generally been growing over the year. Iran spiked all at once and continues to be up where China was a couple days before. That's absolutely amazing. Tor is a technical tool. It can be difficult to use. We've worked a lot to make it easier, but you have to understand what you're doing and why you're doing it to get there. So why do people do this? This is probably tough to see, but I wanted to show it to you. Someone from supposedly from Iran sent this to us as a screenshot saying, here's why people use Tor. It's nice to think that people in Iran want to get the news out and say, here's, all these Western people care about me so much, I should blog about it. It's a lot more plausible in our minds and from this person that they're doing it to share information. This is a map of Tehran with locations of people being shot, where checkpoints are, where helicopters are patrolling, where security forces are rounding up protesters, where vans are showing up. And this is what we were told people are using inside Iran to keep track of the protests and to coordinate from both sides. The police have something just like this. They probably didn't use Google Maps because I don't think the Iranian government would trust an American company. But I'll guarantee you they have something just like this that will show you what's inside Iran and where those pesky protesters are. Conversely, the protesters are using the exact same tools to do the exact same thing. And that's sort of the point, is that it's open access to information. It's a tool, much like a knife. I can cut into meat or I can cut into you. It doesn't matter. It's how you use the tool. Our goal is obviously the positive uses. This is why we're open and we're transparent. We work with law enforcement a lot to help them out. And we let the users use Tor as they will. And that's it. Those are copyrights, just to cover myself. That's it.
Everybody. Sorry, I'm recovering from a cold, which I don't know where I caught with this kind of weather, but I'm gonna bear with me if I have to take a lot of sips of water. Well, thanks for coming. I'm just gonna jump right into the discussion about. I'm gonna focus on the general trends that we saw in terms of using the media during the current movement in Iran, and just instead of focusing on the specifics, I'm trying not to be repetitive. There have been a lot of experts on TV up until about 10 days ago who were discussing this issue of Iran very extensively, and they would frame the struggle in Iran as a struggle between hardliners and reformers, or between the military and the clerics. But I think actually the most productive and relevant way of describing the events in Iran today is it's like a struggle. It's a PR, public relations struggle. On the one side, you have the Mousavi supporters, tech savvy, and know how to use the new media to constantly transfer information with either people inside of Iran or outside, and the government that, as Andrew and Robert explained, they constantly try to block. So first of all, just a quick background. Social networking and the new media actually did play a big role before the election. The Mousavi campaign used it extensively for organizing and getting out the vote. But almost immediately following the election, when both Mousavi and Ahmadinejad a couple of hours later declared victory, and especially when the election commission came just a couple of hours later and announced the election results in support of Ahmadinejad, and in contrast to millions of people's expectations, that's when the events really began to escalate. And what's important to see is that at this point, not only did the political struggle between the Mousavi camp and the Ahmadinejad loyalists began, but also this PR struggle also began with it, where each side tried to use all forms of communication that they had access to frame the story on their own terms. So as the street protests began with thousands of people and eventually millions of people, the Iranian regime did what it does best, using the state-run media to put their own spin on the story. So, as an example, they showed the speech by Ahmadinejad declaring victory on the state-run TV. They used the Air National TV station that is very actually quite new from Iran, and it's called Press TV. They used it to condemn the Western media for covering the violence, and the government for foreign governments for condemning the violence. And they also used newspapers, Iranian newspapers in Iran, to put their own spin on the story. I don't know if you guys can see or read Farsi. Says the uprising in Tehran was managed by the CIA. That's a headline from an Iranian newspaper. Another headline, and this is from today's newspaper, by the way, so it's very up to date. It talks about the design of this project that the West was running to divide and conquer. So that's your state-run media in Iran. But the difference this time is that this is what they've always done. This has been the strategy of the Iranian regime for the past 30 years. The difference is that this time people had their own tools, and the new media had given a lot of power to the opposition, different points of view, to express their viewpoints. So just to go over some of these very briefly, one is the satellite TV channels. And there's not necessarily internet media, but it is sort of a new media in Iran. Satellite TV channels have been around for 10, 15 years, and especially like widespread access by the millions. It's really been like, it's like a 5 to 10 year thing. So you have now Voice of America, where a satirist from works at, and also BBC Persian most recently. And these news stations have become really the only sources where Iranians can get really fair and balanced news from all sides, rather than the state-run media and the state narrative. People also began using news channel websites from all over the world on the web, and also websites like Live Station. And what Live Station does is that it allows people to watch foreign media in a way that is constantly streamed, and so they can watch TV on the web if they don't have satellites. And throughout this time, as Robert referred to, the usage of website Twitter was increased dramatically. And people began sending messages from within as well as outside of Iran about planned actions and protests with times and locations, URL addresses, to videos or news articles on the web, messages from the Mousavi campaign and or Karoubi campaigns, or just plain accounts of what was happening on the ground. And they used digital cameras and cell phones and began to record instances of violence on the streets and against the peaceful protesters, and uploaded these videos on YouTube or other video sharing websites. And the volume of videos became so huge that YouTube actually started a whole new channel just to, it's called the Citizen Tube, and it is just so they can archive all of these videos that are coming from outside of Iran. And one of the videos, of course, that came from Iran was that of the young woman, Neda Sultan, who was shot and died by the Basij as the cameras rolled. I'm sure a lot of you have seen that video, and it gave the Western media a new angle and a sort of a renewed commitment to cover this story. And activists also stayed in touch with American bloggers like myself and a lot of other people here, and they constantly sent us videos, accounts of what happened on the ground. And finally, they also started using Facebook a lot. I mean, you had thousands of people who were sharing articles and videos and announcements, either as individuals or Facebook groups. And in fact, one of these Facebook groups belonged to none other than Mir Hossein Mousavi, the candidate himself. I didn't mean to load his picture, actually. And I don't know if you can see the number of members, 110,000 members. That's a lot of people to be following a group, and then they put announcements, statements by him right on the website, and you have I think the handout briefly talks about this website too. And another group is called Iran. Again, a huge group. Now it's officially become part of the movement. I don't know if this was a new thing or I believe the group was about Iran, but then they became more about the Green movement after this election. Number of members. They have about 65,000 members. So these are really like interesting ways of communicating with thousands of people on a regular basis. Now this massive use of these like new forms of this massive use of the new media took the Iranian regime by somewhat surprise, and it actually put them on defensive. So they started to engage in a lot of sort of like defensive strategies to try to block access to these tools. One was that they cut SMS service and cell phones almost immediately after the election. And then they turned it on, they turned it back off. They also considered shutting down actually all mobile phones, and they even did it a few times. But the difference was that, you know, with mobile phones, you can't just shut down the Mousavi supporters. So, you know, shut down the whole cell phone network, you suddenly make a lot of clerics mad who have a lot of cell phones. So they took away cell phones with cameras from people on the streets. They blocked access to more websites on the net. They arrested members of their national media and took their equipments away. So they started using cell phones to produce video reports. They showed selected footage of CNN's Christian Amanpour and other clips from the Western media to make the point that the Western media was, quote unquote, encouraging the protests. And they jammed signals and intercept satellite TV transmissions, which made it harder for people to access the only really fair news stations that existed. And actually, got in touch with a few of our good friends in Iran and tried to look at a couple of these antennas to give you a sense of these antennas that are used by the Iranian regime to block and intercept satellite transmissions. One is that this is from Tehran, and this first one is a little hard to see, but this building belongs to the Communication Ministry, and this is on Google Earth. And the three black things that you see, these are, it's like looking at antennas from top. So these are three really tall black antennas that are used to intercept satellite transmissions. And the other one, which actually even a lot of Iranians don't know that that's actually the purpose of that other antenna. The point of showing this is to show that, you know, the kind of like populated areas that they put these antennas and they put it in different places. And exactly in places where there is a, again, you can see this huge tower. They put these exactly where they know there is a lot of population. There are a lot of people around in the surrounding areas that use satellite TV. So this tower is actually, most people know this as the Milad Tower, and there's a restaurant on top and everything, but a lot of people don't know that the huge antenna right on top of the restaurant is used to intercept satellite transmissions. And there is a tower. It's a huge tower, and so you have the restaurant here. That's the big antenna right on top. So, just a few quick points at the end here. One of the things that I think through this whole coverage of the use of new media has gone mostly ignored is that this communication and usage of new media to cover the events in Iran has not been a one-way thing where you have the people inside Iran constantly sending information out and the people on the West, like, being at the receiving end. There were, a lot of people on this side have also sent a lot of information back in. For example, those, again, like I want to bring up the satellite TV stations. I mean, the kind of news coverage that Voice of America and BBC Persian have provided. These are the only sources of, at least the TV sources, through which people in Iran have been able to follow the events in Iran. There is no actual independent news stations within Iran to cover these events. Okay, just I'm told the time has expired. I'm going to take 2 minutes. So basically, another example, just to give the final example, is that a lot of this information that's coming out is in Farsi, and so it takes a lot of people at this end to translate the information, process the information, make the videos available. Sometimes people are unable to upload the videos on YouTube, so then they send it as email to bloggers. So then the bloggers put it on the web, or transmit the video back into Iran to their other listservs, so other Iranians see the video without actually the video ever getting on YouTube. And so basically everything, I would say that everything you have seen in Iran is just the beginning of this movement. And right now, the new media, I can tell you that in the West has become your only source of news from Iran, because you see, unlike the mainstream media, we actually, some of us in the blogosphere don't think that the Iranian Revolution died with Michael Jackson. So we actually never stop covering the events that are coming from Iran. So if you want to learn about Iran, turn off Don Lemon and CNN and MSNBC and Fox News, and pour yourself a cup of coffee and log into Huffington Post on YouTube for some real news. Thanks.
Thank you very much, both Andrew and Sam. And if I may, I'd like to turn to Setare.
Thank you. Let me just add that I'm the anchor and contributor to Voice of America's flagship Persian television, News and Views. It's a 2-hour daily news and views program beamed to Iran with a lot of emphasis on inside Iran news. And while the events were unfolding in Iran, I was on the air, and I had a lot of interaction with people inside Iran, and I was following the events. Now, the images and powerful stories that emerged from Iran in recent weeks have given a new meaning to the word media. There's a new format and there's a new form of media that is a bit in contradiction with the traditional media and is competing with the traditional media. In the new media, as you know, and as you all mentioned, there is interactivity, and you see things unfold in front of your eyes as it happens. So it's a two-way street. And in our daily coverage, what we had 8 hours of television with original programming. We cover all the events. We were not only providers of news, but we were also receivers of news. We had a team who monitored what was happening inside Iran. We had lots of videos, and in the height of the protest, the Voice of America Persian, and I will refer to it as PNN, which is the Persian News Network, was receiving about 300 videos on the You Send It site every 24 hours. And we had a dedicated team to monitor that and monitor the authenticity. So this is an impact that I believe that changes a little bit the function of new media and creates new functions and new roles. Instead of the people that you had for editing, for instance, now you have people who monitor things and have to make a decision right away to say whether this is the right video or the correct thing to air and whether it's authentic. So that's one particular impact. It is wonderful to have the new media, but it creates a lot of challenges for people like me who have been in this business for the last 16 years and who are more used to traditional media. We want to make sure, and we wanted to make sure during our coverage, that we did not contribute to what was going on, and we did not want to project ourselves as someone who was involved in interfering. We just wanted to give the information, because there's a fine line between information, giving information, and advocacy. So this was also, with all the information that we were receiving, we had to be very, very careful. So this is what we did. In my show, the show that I do on a daily basis, we used the information through the new media, but we also used our traditional line of communication. We had our reliable sources inside and outside Iran, and we wanted to make sure to be to relay the story but not be part of the story. Now, there is tension between new media and traditional media. There's no doubt that in the events that unfolded and the events after they announced quickly the results of the elections, the new media had a very, very important role. But it is not everything. And the new media can also be blocked, as you all mentioned. The regime devoted a lot of efforts to online censorship. And also in Twitter, for example, there's another drawback, and I think, Robert, you mentioned that. I think there's no depth and there's no breadth because it's minimal. The message is minimal. So there are positive points about the new media, but there are also disadvantages to that. So we have to make sure at VOA, that's what we do, that the traditional values of journalism are not sacrificed in the name of speed and just the fact that we want to get the news out to the world. Now, how do we know how to separate fact from fiction? This is one of the questions that is always raised. In Iran, people tend to check different sources of information. They have developed an ability to do so. This is an advantage because once they check all the information, they know that we are accurate. So this is wonderful for us. They will find out whether we're giving the right information or not, the correct information or not. Now, the disadvantage is that since people have been raised and they have lived under a dictatorship, a government that is closed, and a media that is controlled by the government, they are very, very skeptical. And they sometimes think that the news coming from the West is somewhat, has a hidden agenda or it's propaganda. So we also have to make sure that we are clear on that. How Iranians know what to believe? Well, what happened overall in Iran after the elections and the prominent role that the new media played, I think that will change the course of information inside Iran. If the regime cracks down, if it continues to crack down and it continues to close the door to foreign media, Iranians will most probably rely more on the new media. The new media is going to be censored and jammed, as Sam also mentioned that, but there are ways to go around that. Now, the Washington Post had an interesting editorial today, and I would like just to read one sentence off of that. It says, regimes must spend thousands to put up walls and barriers. Once there are enough holes in a firewall, it crumbles. That's what we have done at VOA. We have created proxies, we have increased our satellites, and after the results of the elections were announced, as you know, the story went beyond the results of the elections. It was not only about that, but it was about the situation in Iran. It was about the economic situation, the fact that young people didn't have a future. They didn't know what was going on. There's inflation, there's unemployment. So the story kept growing, and what we did, we adjusted our coverage to this expanding and unfolding and escalating events. And we were very well positioned to do so because we had already established a team of people who were reporting on the elections before June 12th. We enhanced our overall internet efforts by adding a Twitter Twitter feed to the existing Facebook and blogs. We received new satellite frequencies to prevent jamming and interruptions. And we established a unique protected internet path for Iranians to transmit videos to us. Now, I don't know the technical side of it, but these were the things that were available to us. This resulted in receiving thousands of videos, thousands of emails and phone calls from people as the events were unfolding, thousands of comments, as well as calls of what was happening on the ground. Now, we had an 800% rise in the website visits for the period of after the elections up to the end of June. And our Twitter account drew 4,600 followers, and this was all in the face of heavy Iranian internet interference and censorship. Part of our response also after the election results was that we introduced 2 hours of new programming, and because Iranians wanted to know what was happening in their country. We launched a new morning show that was from 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. Tehran time, and we replaced 2 of our shows, which was the History Channel and Today's Woman, and we replaced that with a special program that was focusing on the events inside Iran. We had the latest videos from what we called citizen journalists and other sources to illustrate the latest development. We had calls from inside Iran live for these particular shows that we had. We had reports on the reaction of the Iranian diaspora. We had field reporters in the United States, Europe, in the Middle East. We covered all the angles of the Congress, the White House, the State Department. And these were the things that people were asking us to do. They wanted to know what was happening and how they were perceived also by the West. What was the West thinking about them? We are continuing to do so also right now. So we are covering the aftermath of what was going on and what has been going on in the last 2-3 weeks. And I would like to go over some statistics about VOA Persian, our PNN. Our audience is about 15 million weekly. That's 1 in 4 adults, nearly 30% of adults. And I believe that maybe this number has doubled since the elections. This is the beginning of the month of June, and we have new numbers after the 12th. So this is probably much, much larger. The views at VOA's Persian language website increased, as I mentioned, 800% from the time of the election until the demonstrations were going on. We dedicated a YouTube site for Persian and a Twitter site, and we have also an English website, the voanews.com, that had 10.5 million views in June of 2009, and that was 40% more than the month of May. So this is what we have been doing at VOA, and I will be happy to take questions after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Satare. We're just about to open the floor up to questions. However, I'd like to take moderator's prerogative and ask just a couple of my own before doing so. However, as we do open the floor, please, before stating your question, and if necessary with a brief preface, make sure to give your name and organization. My first question, I'm going to direct this specifically to you, Robert, but of course, open for commentary from all our panelists. The Iranian government seemed to be somewhat slow to respond if we compare that, say, to events that we see right now in Urumqi in China. Twitter was still working for a while, whereas at least by one New York Times report today, it was shut down immediately as soon as protests began. And I'm wondering, is this a sign? I mean, you indicated that Twitter perhaps received a little more attention than was deserving. But can we actually see that maybe it's seen its day? I mean, as Sam indicated, shutting down the internet, of course, has great political and economic consequences. Twitter's something a little different. Now that it's sort of like on the radar screen of governments of closed societies, can we expect much more from it?
I guess the first question is whether the Iranian government was prepared to shut down social media and whether they were to do it again, would they take more aggressive action in some sense? And I'm not sure how to answer that. I think they are very adept and very sophisticated at blocking online content, and it's just a deeply difficult thing to do and imperfect. You have the choice of letting a lot of things through and showing a little bit of restraint, or massively over-blocking communications with a lot of collateral damage involved in doing so. The Chinese similarly they've been down this road many times before, and they turn websites on and off regularly. There's no great recipe for it. I think they're trying to feel their way through this. It's really, I think, more of a difficult battle of public opinion and media, of which blocking individual websites is one small piece of the puzzle. And I don't think they've cracked that nut at all. I think Twitter is going to be with us for a while. It's one of the things we've learned about Twitter is that it's very, very difficult to block it. There's many, many ways into it and many ways out of it. And blocking the site itself is easy to do. As they did in Iran, you can shut down SMS to prevent people from texting into Twitter, but there's many third-party applications, and using applications such as Tor, it's easy to get in and out of Twitter as well.
Can I add to that? That's great. You can go with technical aspects. I try to, a lot more than I do. But on the political side, I think that the reason that you see that the Iranian government maybe isn't as fast as you would expect is that, believe it or not, with all of these activities that they do to try to restrict access to the internet and different tools, they try to at the same time spin it in a way that would allow them to try to claim the moral high ground too. For example, when they cut SMS text, they didn't say we did it intentionally because we don't want you guys to talk to each other and organize. They said, they sent the communication minister out who said, this was all just an accident. We have to see what happened. It was, just like they denied that they even actually did it intentionally. They're like, yeah, it's a problem that happened. We're working on it. And if they shut down the entire internet, it becomes really hard for them to explain that away by saying, sorry, the entire internet broke. A few websites, they have actually, like, for example, there were allegations that they hacked the Mousavi's website a few times. Well, they didn't come out and actually say we hacked the website. They were like, yeah, we have been having with some websites have been accidentally blocked. We're sorry about that. Coincidentally, all the websites that were accidentally blocked were the Farsi news from BBC, and Mousavi's webpage was hacked. And so it's this constantly trying to actually spin it in a way that, would and just a last example is that they, when they took away the equipment of Western journalists, they didn't say we don't want you to cover the real, events that are happening on the ground. They said that these journalists are actually encouraging protests. So they lied just to put a spin on it and say that, anyone would take the equipment away from these people, not just us. So I think that may be another reason.
Thank you both. My second question centers a lot around this debate of the sort of profiling. Was this use of Twitter, use of Facebook in order to mobilize people, and particularly getting news outside of Iran, something that came from an elite minority of urbanites who happen to be tech savvy and actually understand how to use these applications, thereby getting a greater voice outside of Iran, but really disproportionate to what the majority of Iranians really saw as a legitimate outcome of elections. There are analysts here in Washington, other places that are going back and forth about this very issue. I would add that I've seen something that would at least contradict this in a Berkman Center report that they've done on the Iranian blogosphere, where they've actually found that there are large numbers of Iranians that come from they can be defined by their blogs as being religiously conservative and contributing a good deal. So my question then is, is this something that's really just sort of the territory of, again, this kind of urban elite, as some would argue, or are we actually seeing that much of Iran across the political spectrum is plugged into these web-based means of disseminating information?
Real quick, because I've been following this actually. Yeah, I've heard many stories on that. I think that it's true that the usage of media, various kinds of media, is more segregated in Iran than in free countries. Like during the last election here in the U.S., you had people on both sides, McCain and Obama, using all forms of media, internet and TV, sending guests on TV shows and everything. In Iran, it's more segregated, where you have this state-run media that exclusively reports on only one side, the government side, gives voice to them and nobody else. And then you have the new media people. And the new media people are usually people who can afford internet and can afford satellite dishes and everything. Most of those people are better off, and more or less that overlaps with the more better off you are, the more educated probably you are. So that means you're probably in the cities, whereas you have access to satellites and everything less in like villages. But honestly, my position on it is, if there are all these Ahmadinejad supporters out there, where are they? I mean, why don't they come to the streets? Why don't we see Ahmadinejad's own movement with their own color in the streets and counter-protesting? This is counter-protest is a very common trend when you look at nonviolent movements around the world. So this idea that there's this hidden majority who is sitting home and is just accepting all these major assaults on their candidates, and they're just not coming out to talk about it, and coincidentally, all the Mousavi supporters are super motivated to die for their candidate, it's just sounds a little far-fetched. So,
if I could just follow up on that, I think the critique that new media is not necessarily representative of the population at large is true. It's true in the United States. It's true in China. It's true in Iran. So fair enough. Even within that, there is a diversity of opinion. As you mentioned in our blogosphere study, we did find all strata of society and all the full spectrum of political thought participating in the blogosphere there. I think Sam makes a very important point that the current government had control over TV and radio, which is much more effective than new media. And their message was there, and the opposition had to go to online sources where they were able to. So is it representative? Who knows? Yeah.
Thank you for that. With that, I'd like to open the floor to questions.
Hi, Mark Drapo, National Defense University. Just to comment briefly on the initial question, I think that Twitter will remain relevant, but Twitter Incorporated in California to some extent is not relevant because there are dozens and dozens of Twitter clone websites. There are open source Twitter clones like Identica. And so even if Twitter is on people's radar, this mechanism of micro-sharing is almost certainly here to stay in some form or another. And so given that, when it's so easy for someone in a U.S. embassy or at the State Department or a think tank to track what individual people are doing in other countries now because they're tweeting or blogging or taking photos, and it's so easy to reach out to them one-on-one, what do you think that means for the future of diplomacy and how the State Department actually carries it out? Especially when using things like Tor, you can be anonymous, and so there can be people in the State Department directly messaging someone leading a protest in another country in real time, and it's not really clear what the rules are about if that's right or wrong or to what extent you can be doing that. So where do you guys all see that general trend going, not just in Iran, I suppose, but in other countries?
So I look at high school students and how they circumvent their parents' controls. how do you know that what you're talking to is actually your friend than not? How do you know that who is saying, you know, you should keep doing these things, we encourage you to keep doing whatever, is actually on your side or is actually an agent of your own government trying to, you know, get you to convict yourself? You don't. You develop relationships, and I think the relationships will matter more if some random person, even me, some random person from the U.S. State Department says, you should go protest. Our first answer is, all right, who are you? Why do I care? Not, sure, let me go out there and start running around screaming. If you have a relationship, you know, if people trust VOA Persia for the stories, you know, if they start saying things, they will come out and they will start, you know, I trust the person, I know the person, I'll learn the person, I'll start doing, you know, I agree with what they say or I don't agree with what they say. And I think that's going to matter more. For the same reason when, you know, marketers at the store ask you, you know, tell me all about yourself. I don't know, my first reaction is no. My wife's first reaction is, what do I get? I guess it's incentives matter. It's just different. Governments are used to working on a government level, and now they can be very personal, and you can have a huge amount of change for good or for bad. You know, in those reactions, it's going to be a learning curve. I mean, it's sort of like the printing presses. You know, you'd had monks scribe books, and then printing presses came out, so lots of people can read books. How do you reach those people? How do you get them in mass? I know it doesn't directly answer your question, but I think it's relationships and what what the other person is going to do when someone from known opposition says, you know, you should do X. What do they do? I mean, most likely they talk to their friends. Say, well, what do you think? What should we do? Should we go protest or should we hide?
Can I just, I think that's a great question. It's a very, very difficult question. I think the role of diplomacy, given social media, is going to be more complicated than it used to be. I think what governments need to do doesn't change that much, but what's different is that people are talking to each other directly in a very public way that they did not before. In some cases, that's all for the good. We'll find a lot of affinity and increase understanding across cultures, but that's not always necessarily the case. I think in a lot of instances in the future, you're going to see the citizens of people yelling at each other across the internet with the government trying to apologize for them.
Just a quick point to add. I think new media allows everybody to have his own individual foreign policy. So the great thing is, if you want to promote something, you don't have to, I mean, you know, obviously, if you vote for somebody who becomes president who agrees with you and then they change the State Department in your ways, that's great. But the great thing is that's not the only thing you can do. You can promote your cause through all these new forms of media because there are no borders in the internet. So.
Thank you. Marguerite Sullivan with CIMA, and I had a question for Sam and Sitara. How did you judge the information you were getting, whether it was true or not? You said as events went on, you were getting a flood of information. And could you also update us on what's happening now? Has the information you've been getting gone to a trickle? Are you still getting this much? And how many hours a day is VOA on now?
That's a very good question. This was a challenge to us too, because we were getting all this flood of information from different people. We had, as I mentioned, we had a team who would monitor, a dedicated team to do that. We had people who were looking at the videos that we were receiving. We were receiving the same videos within a few minutes of each other, and they were pretty much the same. And this is one of the ways that we were trying to check the authenticity. We were also checking the credibility and authenticity against the news that we were receiving on the internet, on the email. So we were cross-checking all these. For instance, as an example, I can give you one of the days was a day of mourning. So we wanted to make sure that the videos that we were receiving, everybody was wearing black. So but we used a lot of common sense, but also cross-checking. The videos have subsided. We are receiving less emails, less videos, less calls. It has various reasons, I think. One, as you know, because the government, the crackdown continued, and people are quite scared of making contacts. And as you know, the government has mentioned the names of VOA, the Voice of America, and the BBC as inciting and contributing to the unrest. So that makes people very, very leery talking to us. The latest is that, as I said, the numbers have decreased, but we still remain the source of information. From the emails that we are still receiving, people are hungry for information, and they're hungry to see how they are perceived by the West. And they're waiting to see what the United States is going to do.
I think that's very accurate. It makes it harder for us to try to decide what's news and what's fact, what's fiction. In my case, I think Robert was very eloquent in sort of fighting back against the concept that this is a Twitter revolution. I think Twitter will go as a sort of a kind of a curious aspect of this movement, but I think it diminishes the movement to call this a Twitter revolution, or to think that Twitter was actually like a key element in all of this. I mean, if you look at most of the tweets with the pound Iran election code at the end are in English. Well, Iranians don't tweet in English. So most of these are, now my theory is that most of them are tweets by Iranians, but they're outside of Iran, you know, and every time the piece of new information goes through a filter, like a translation, or gets passed on with slightly rephrased, and it becomes less reliable. So in my case, for blogging, I've relied mostly on videos, because the great thing about videos is, in a way, videos are sort of self-verifying. Like, when I see a security person beating somebody or shooting somebody, well, I mean, I have doubts that it was an actual like stage theater and somebody got a camera and like made up a scene. I presume most of them are fairly accurate in terms of what happened. Now, I don't know this exact context of it, but at least I can put the video out there and have people be the judge of, like, you know, how they see this. But it becomes very hard to try to verify information. And yes, information has the level of information has gone down for the past 5 to 10 days, but there are many chain emails that I constantly reach. There are about 50 of them every day. Farsi emails talking about various actions planned, statements by Mousavi or Karoubi, and a surprising number of them are accurate. So,
if I may add, the videos that you all have seen of Neda Agha Sultan, the young woman who was killed, and it was the video was everywhere. We received the video. We were actually one of the first ones who received the video, and the Washington Post also carried the story. But we did not break the story. It was on YouTube, and it went on CNN. We waited, and we reported that 5 minutes after CNN because we wanted to make sure that it was authentic. We do receive videos that are not authentic, and we want to make sure that our credibility is intact. So we have to double-check everything.
Hi, Keon Sherman with U.S. Agency for International Development. I had a question. A lot of the discussion is around sort of information coming in and information going out. And particularly now, when the information flow out seems to be significantly slowed down, I'm wondering how much we know about the information within Iran and how people are communicating amongst each other now. And, you know, there hasn't been any mention today yet of Bluetooth technology, now that perhaps text messaging is on and off. Are people listening to radio? I mean, what do people find as the safest way to communicate amongst each other in light of sort of Facebook shutdown, things like that?
So, over the last week, we heard that a lot of people use Yahoo Instant Messaging to communicate within families, you know, both the diaspora and inside Iran. And Tor usage has peaked, you know, much like the information flow, but it still remains high. I think this, you know, what we're told from people who randomly show up through Tor and tell us, hey, you know, we use Yim. There's still a lot of communication. A lot of it's curiosity or, confusion. What's going on? What do we do? All my friends used to protest. Now I don't know what to do anymore. We used to blog about this from this internet cafe. Now there's these strange people who hang out in the internet cafe. They're doing a lot of communication, sort of organizing, sort of just trying to figure out what do they do next. Now that, the crackdown and the clerics made some statements and the government came back and said, no, they're all crazy. And that seems to be what I know about what's going on, or what we've been told about what's going on, is that, they use a lot of Yahoo IM. They're the more technical people who are sort of like the tech trainers or the help for a lot of these other people are starting to worry about what Yahoo's recording and what they know about what's going on with all these conversations, because Yahoo is right in the middle and can see it all. Will the Iranian government ask them, I want all your logs for June 12th through now, and with IPs, and get it over now, or we'll kick you out of the country. These are all valid concerns for people.
This is a valid and legitimate question that you raised, and the problem was also among Iranians. As they were contacting us, they did not know what was going on. The main student group in Iran, actually sponsored by the government, but at least it's an element that people can get together and organize things. They had no idea who was the leader of these demonstrations, what was going to happen next, why were they out, what did they want. After the elections, whether if they asked for the elections to be annulled, what was the next step? So there's this lack of organization, this lack of communication among people, and aside from the new media, the Voice of America, the television, the BBC, these were most of the outlets that they could get their information from. But there was definitely a confusion about what to do next and where they would go.
Hi, Nick Demeter with International Relief and Development. It's a very exciting time, obviously, and it's been wonderful hearing your perspectives. For centuries, dictatorships have had the benefit of propaganda. Now the people have that opportunity, so hopefully this continues a little bit to balance it out. But my question is about Iran specifically. In the study that you have done, Mr. Ferris, there was a lot of discussion about how Ahmadinejad and the religious leaders, a lot of these folks have blogs and Facebook pages. How unique is Iran, and is there any parallels? Is the cat out of the bag, so to speak? Did Iran open the window enough, and now the dictators of the world elsewhere are able to prevent this from happening in their country? What are the possible parallels that we can see this happen in other countries?
So that's a tough question. Governments learn quickly. If you look at the Orange Revolution in the Ukraine, the next year the elections happened, they shut off the text networks before the election happened. They're not going to let that happen twice. Embarrass me once, shame on me. Embarrass me twice, well, forget that. I think, I guess the current situation right now is in China with the Uyghurs. China's had a lot of experience in this, and it's a fairly decentralized Great Firewall where there's a central command, but a lot of these little groups have to do their work, and some of them are slower than others. What's going on there is they preemptively blocked most of the stuff, the Twitters, the FanFoods, the QQs ahead of time because they knew it was going to happen. And now you're seeing file sharing sites like RapidShare and Drop.io being used for picture releases, videos, what's going on inside the country. To sound like an internet fanboy, information wants to be free. Your citizens want to get the information out there, and China's actually doing a fairly smart thing in that they're inviting foreign journalists in, trying to do what Iran did with the spin. They're saying, come see this, come see what happened. We'll tell you our side of the story. Don't just believe all these people posting pictures. Trying to have a conversation as opposed to just a stonewall. While at the same time they are stonewalling and saying, here's a firewall, we blocked all this stuff so you get less of the other side, but please come visit us and we'll tell you their side. I think that will happen more often, that governments will realize that technology tools such as Tor can be used for both their purposes and the activist purposes, but using social pressures, being, the appearance of more transparency will help them in the end. Whether that's good or bad for the citizens remains to be seen, but I think that's what will happen more frequently as this happens, as more countries come online.
I think that one of the trends that you have seen, at least in Iran's case, is that, yes, they've been slow in many ways in responding to various videos or trying to explain them. One of the things that happened after the video of Neda Sultan came out, the young woman who was shot as the camera rolled, was that the Iranian regime actually went on a propaganda campaign a few days later, blaming the killing on, you guessed it, other protesters, and in fact they've been denying that any government element had even anything to do with it. So, and I think we were earlier in the beginning of the event talking about an article that's on the New York Times today about how China is learning a lot of lessons from everything that's been happening in Iran, and I'm sure that if you go probably to world pages, you're probably going to be able to find an article that exactly looks at the issue that you're talking about.
Jad Melki, professor at the American University of Beirut. Question directed to Mr. Robert Faris. I wonder if we knew from the new media coming out of Iran that the message is coming out, but in your studies, I'm wondering if there's any observations about the impact on mainstream media in the U.S. Traditionally, theories have shown that mainstream U.S. media has shown foreign affairs as pretty simplistic, aligned with U.S. foreign government, bad guys versus good guys, and the good guys are usually, again, aligned with the U.S. Government. If there's any impact on that in the Iranian events, because when I was following the stories in Morocco and in Lebanon online, there was a lot of nuances about who Mousavi was, his history as a prime minister aligned with Khomeini. Is not above the corruption, not above the system. He's not exactly a revolutionary coming to overthrow the system, and the different groups that were engaged in the revolutions. But that was not really relayed in the mainstream U.S. media, although it was in a lot of U.S. blogs and new media. So,
great question. I'm not going to be able to give you a great answer. It's not something that we've studied in depth. I've been reading the mainstream media just as the rest of you have, so I only have my own opinion on it without any evidence behind it. I think they've done somewhat a better job because of the existence of these new media. There's numerous groups that have done a phenomenal job of aggregating news coming out of Iran and translating things and getting reports that wouldn't have been available otherwise. I think it's much richer for that. I think that the long-form media that brings context to these things, I think you need to look outside of mainstream media and complement it with new media if you want to get that full picture still. They only have so much time they can devote to it, and as Sam points out, they need to cover Michael Jackson now.
This gentleman and then Mr.
I'm Parsa Bastani from the World Security Institute. I was just wondering, what was the role of women in the protests? Western media has reported abundantly on this and how they served as the backbone of the movements. Would you say this is an accurate representation, and do the people in Iran hold the same belief that women played as pivotal a role?
Yes, as being the only woman, I'm supposed to answer that. But this goes a little, the gentleman who teaches at the American University, I think you mentioned, it goes back to that, and mainstream media here. I think they have been focusing on some issues that somewhat, we have to give credit to them for covering a lot of issues and getting a lot of information from inside Iran, but also there are some issues that they have not covered, or they have focused on some things that might not be so true inside Iran. It is true that the women inside Iran had a big role in the events that unfolded, but this has been the case throughout the history of Iran. This is not only the 1979 revolution. This is not only the elections, the presidential elections. This happened in 1906, the constitutional revolution in Iran, where women had a prominent role. Women in Iran usually are much more, I would say, a little bit more sophisticated than maybe the neighbors. They are, the level of education is much higher. And there's a public life and a private life in Iran. And in their private lives, Iranian women run a lot of things. And they are getting more and more involved in public life. So maybe it is good and it's commendable that they are mentioning the role of women, but this is not a new phenomenon, and it has been going on for years as part of the history of Iran.
Hi, I'm Darren from the International Center on Nonviolent Conflict, and my question is for Sam and Satere, and the question is not so much on whether or not how you determine the truth and accuracy of information that you get through new media, but the appropriateness of posting it. And you all spoke a lot about the image of Neda dying on the internet. And I was wondering what conversations you had with your respective organizations, PNN or Huffington Post, on whether or not you should show that. And then the second question is, what impact do you think that video has on pressuring other governments in releasing footage or images that could be damaging to their image? There was an article in the New York Times recently where I think Helen Thomas questioned President Obama on, someone had asked him about whether or not he'd seen the video of Neda passing away, and he said, yes, it was terrible. And she said, well, why aren't you showing the other footage, images of detainee abuse at Abu Ghraib? So, again, does that increase the pressure of other governments to share images that might not paint them in such a good light?
We did not show Neda's picture at the very beginning. As I said, we didn't break the news, but we did it right after CNN. We had covered the face, and this is an editorial decision that we all made, that we should not air it. But since we saw it on YouTube, we saw it on every outlet, organization, news organization. It was everywhere. And we decided, we went along with the wave of these pictures, and that's when we made the decision. There were some violent scenes that we did not show. We decided that they were too violent and there was no reason to show blood. So it's a case-by-case, I would say, a matter. Now, as far as what you said about Helen Thomas, and I respect her tremendously, I'm not sure if we should compare the two societies. What happens in Iran with the picture of Neda, that has also been a little bit sensationalized. I mean, no one really kept the dignity of this young woman, and it's been all over the internet. But since we are a very, very different society, I'm not sure if it has any effect on an American society to show the pictures of prisoners, of what is happening in this country. So these are two separate items.
I think that's a great question. There are a lot of videos that I get in the emails that I'm scared to open. And I try to tell people to tell me before that in the email what the video is going to be about, because I want to be prepared. There have been lots of videos that, have made me choke up, could not show it, way too graphic, or that it would just not be, I don't think, appropriate for the constituency and the readers of the Huffington Post. But I write about it and try to describe it as much as I can without actually have the image. Their video is a whole lot worse than Neda's video. As far as what guidelines the Huffington Post has, they tend to be pretty good. I've never had an instance of me posting a video that they would take down. But they have a board of editors that constantly monitor what's going up. When we write a blog, it's not like a blog spot where you write a blog, you hit submit, right there it's live. We submit blogs 24 hours ahead of time. It goes through layers of editors and everything, but it usually happens within 24 hours. And then once it goes up, if you want a live blog or if you want to add additional information, that content gets monitored too. So they're pretty good at it. But in terms of pressuring us to actually, like, in terms of, like, you know, do you know, is this accurate? Do you know, they only do it if we are presenting the information as if it's a fact. But if you're saying, you know, I just got off the phone with an activist in Iran who told me this, then the article pretty much, you know, sort of, it's like a disclaimer saying that, you know, Huffington Post is not either confirming or denying the accuracy of the report. But we got this information, let's put it out there, have people decide how they're going to judge. And I agree with Setara. I think Abu Ghraib is a completely different context. I mean, I don't think it's comparable, for one thing, because I think there would have been more pressure on the Obama administration on the presidential administration in the U.S. from the media if it was the Bush administration that was denying the showing of these pictures. But the fact is, Obama ran on the platform of, you know, condemning all these actions that happened in Abu Ghraib and Guantanamo Bay. So and it's not like, you know, the pictures that are, you know, would be released are things that he has committed or the people under his administrations have committed. So there's less pressure and there's more discretion given to the administration when they say that the photos will ultimately just ignite outrage in the Middle East.
If I could real quick just jump in while we're on the subject of women's contributions to events in post-electoral Iran, and in some cases the dearest of sacrifices. From the work that the Berkman Center has done, from data that you have at Tor, across the board, from your own personal context, what are you getting a sense of in terms of women themselves actually becoming activists through these through this new media? You know, for example, in the research that you've done on the blogosphere, the number of women out there that are actually having blogs where they're talking about political or social issues, or the extent to which perhaps it's possible to identify that women themselves have been behind mobilizing people to come out in the streets and protest for their right to vote. Have you been able to garner this kind of information to get a sense that there's increasing space that they're taking advantage of?
In the blogosphere, yeah, we've documented that Iranian women are very, very active in the blogosphere. I don't actually know how that translates into offline activity. I'd love to hear about that. It sounds like yes. Yeah.
Well, I agree also in the blogosphere, but in a closed society such as Iran, I think people have a very good understanding that tools like elections or elements or institutions such as elections in the parliament are not really ways for people to have political participation. And they have come, they understand that very well right now. This is why women have various organizations. I'm sure you all have, or maybe you haven't, but heard of the 1 million campaign, the women who have been doing that. Some of them have been arrested, some of them have been persecuted. Once this has been settled, there was a movement in Iran thinking that change has to come from within through the elements and the institutions that are in place. This movement now, which was the reform movement, it has lost somewhat its credibility, and women also understand that in order to get somewhere, they have to organize. So aside from blogs, yes, they're organizing. There are several NGOs, there are several lawyers, who are trying to get the voice of other women, the less educated. They are organizing. That is also in the framework of the Islamic Republic. There's not much they can do because of the system, because of the Vilayat al-Faqih, because of the way the system is put together. So the answer to your question is yes, they are organizing, they are participating more. I don't know of any cases that only women have asked people to come out. This is among with other people. But with the tools that they have been trying to be active, but not necessarily just mobilizing people to, women's group trying to mobilize people to come out on the streets and protest or have, various requests and so forth. I hope I answered your question.
Hi, Felicia Knight with Night Vision International. And this is a question for Satara, and maybe Sam can chime in on this too, but it's more of a follow-up with what you said, that you were receiving many, many emails and videos and inquiries wanting to know how they were being perceived by the West. Why do they care how they are perceived by the West, and how do they want to be perceived by the West? And do you even know?
Well, as you can see, the general sentiment in Iran is that people are somewhat embarrassed by the president because of the way he has portrayed Iran internationally. Aside from internal problems, economic problems that I mentioned, inflation, young people not knowing what's going to happen in their future, Ahmadinejad has really destroyed the image of Iran. This is a topic of conversation among people. Yes, of course they know that with what he says. So that's one thing, one of the reasons also that they definitely want to change, because they want this image to change. They don't want to be seen. Under President Bush, they were seen as one of the axis of evil. Under Mr. Ahmadinejad, they are seen as a country, or as he represents for them a country that doesn't want Israel to exist. He's saying things that don't make sense. He's asking people to have debates. So it's really not representative of what people want, how they want to be perceived by the West. Iran is an important country to the United States, and the United States is an important country to Iran. They feel that there are decisions made in the West that will affect them. If there are sanctions at the UN, if there are sanctions at the European Union, this will affect their daily lives. So that's one of the reasons that they want to follow and know what is happening in the West, why people are doing this, and why people are not differentiating between their government and the people. The sanctions, for instance, was a much it's a big topic of debate inside Iran. They wonder why they had increased the sanctions, because it only hurt the people and it didn't really do much to the government. So they are interested in knowing how people feel about them, how they're perceived, and why some governments are taking these actions that they are taking.
I think it's a big part of it. I think it's the biggest part of it. That's why they, the reason that they try to communicate with a lot of us in the new media and blogosphere, and also VOA and BBC Persian, is because they want to say that that's just they don't want to be seen in the same image that Ahmadinejad has drawn. But I think another reason is that most of the Iranians who email me want much more decisive action on the part of international bodies and the United Nations and Western countries to speak up. They think that it gives their movements momentum and everything. And it's funny because I was at Voice of America about 10 days ago, and I posed a question to people. There was a vibrant debate here going on in the U.S. where there were people who were saying, no, President Obama shouldn't say much, should stay out of it. And there were a lot of people who were saying, no, he should speak up when he sees like people getting killed. So I'm like, instead of, relying on, Iran experts in Washington, why don't we just pose the question to Iranians and see what they respond? So I went on VOA and posed the question, and one of the lines from one of the emails that I got was very interesting. The person said, of course, it's very nice of President Obama to not want to interfere, but why do you think we write our signs in English? I'm like, that's a fantastic point. They don't write it in English by themselves. So they want a lot of world attention, and I think that's part of why they constantly want to get the information out, and they follow up to make sure that it's actually published somewhere.
Let me just add that it's true what Sam is saying, but also President Obama mentioned something very important. He said people sometimes in Iran might not really pay attention or might not care what the Democrats are saying or what the Republicans are saying. If there's a debate on push more for Iran and do this, people don't care, and it is true. They do want their voices to be heard. They want international organizations, human rights organizations, to defend their cause, to get the news out, but I think they want the change and to come from within Iran. They still believe that a lot of people, the majority of the people, we post questions all the time on our website, and we get feedback from people inside Iran. They want the Obama administration to continue their position on Iran. They don't want interference because they know that it will backfire. So they, even though they want their voices to be heard, they still would like foreign countries to stay out.
My question goes probably to Robert and Andrew. For technical people, is there any way to find out how much information Iranians are getting from outside, from the West, especially in relation to the Iranian upheaval, and especially because many of you mentioned that they are interested to find out what the West thinks about them, what is the image they project. So is there any way to find out how much information they are getting?
No. It would be tremendously difficult to do so. You could try to figure out what's available online without circumvention technologies, but understanding how people were actually reading and what they were absorbing would be very, very expensive to try to figure that out. It would be hard. It's a wonderful question. I wish I knew the answer to that.
The people who would know would be the Iranian government watching the internet connections from outside. Chances are they're not going to tell you. Or maybe they will and broadcast, months down the road, our new firewall protected you from X millions of requests of bad information from foreign devils or something. I don't know. But, that's information that X millions of requests would give you the scale of, is it millions, thousands, tens of thousands, billions. Other than that, I don't think the Iranian government's going to give up their information of how much they're blocking.
Or how much news they're getting. I think we do surveys at VOA. We have companies that do these surveys for us, and they contact people when they travel outside Iran. They talk to a lot of people who are in Dubai. There's a large Iranian community in Dubai. They talk to people who were in Turkey. They did phone surveys. And from what we got was that they rely very much on foreign Persian language televisions from outside. We don't know the percentage, but this was a main source of information, or accurate information, as they said. We were not allowed to mention the name of VOA during these surveys, but they did say that they watch television a lot.
And just a quick point. I know there was a poll in the Washington Post that talked about how made the case that Mousavi actually did lose the election and everything, and I looked at the method of study, and it showed that 50% of the respondents didn't answer. I think the problem with polls in Iran and is that, like Satara mentioned, probably most of the people who take foreign trips or who are willing to answer survey. Well, most of the people who are willing to take foreign trips in that case, I think, it was sort of a self-selective system where most of the people were probably people who maybe don't completely agree with the positions of the regime and everything, and those people are more willing to rely on satellite. And the Washington Post poll was the exact reverse, because the poll was done within Iran. Well, inside Iran, if you ask people how they feel about the supreme leader, you know, I mean, they're not going to say, oh, we don't like him. They're going to get thrown in jail. So they refuse to respond. So that's another problem with some of the surveys that I think have been going on in Iran. It's not like surveys done like in New York. So.
You're right, but I think the Washington Post survey that you're mentioning was done by a company, and the problem was that this was done before the campaign even started. So that was the major problem. That's why they assumed that Mousavi was going to lose. Okay. That was the flaw in that particular survey that they did.
Thanks. Ian Schuler, I'm with NDI. I was wondering what your feelings are on what the role of new media is going to be going forward. I'd be particularly interested in your thoughts, Robert, because it seems that as this movement evolves, that while there will still be a need to get information in and out of the country, there'll be an even greater need for coordination and organization and the sort of things that you said that new media hasn't proven to be very effective at in Iran thus far.
I'm not sure I exactly understood what's the role of new media moving forward in Iran. What the government allows it to do is, and I don't know the answer to that. The point I really wanted to make was that new media as an organizational tool is very, very fragile and easy to break up, and those that engage in new media as a political organizing tool put themselves at great risk. And it's the cost and benefits. It's the calculus of the government trying to figure out how repressive it can be and get away with it. And I'm not sure we know the answer to that.
It also depends on how much Western companies are willing to put profits before principles. So, you know, you had Nokia, Siemens that sold the technology that they had originally developed for their own systems, actually, to where that would allow the company to listen on calls. And they realized, oh, there is a big opportunity to profit from this. So they started selling the technology to Iran. And so I think it depends both on the government's willingness to limit these technologies, which they will as much as they can while still being able to put a spin on it. And it also depends on how much Western companies are willing to provide technology for them.
Well, if I may, just real quick, a question for Andrew then, since we're talking about surveillance. Are there vulnerabilities for your users, or do you see new obstacles in the future coming along as closed society governments become more sophisticated or more aware of the dangers, quote unquote, of new media for them?
Yes. Look at Saudi Arabia, for example. They watch everything. They don't block a whole lot, but they sure watch everything. Every contact, everything that goes on in the country and through the borders. Just in case you decide to organize and start, standing up for women's rights or something. They have a long history of your social network, and they are very effective at the social pressure of, they won't talk to you, the activist, they'll talk to all your friends saying, you went to dinner in this coffee shop with this person. Why did you do that? She's saying anti-state things. That's very effective. There's not a lot of circumvention in Saudi Arabia because they trust their government for the most part. They believe their government is doing the right thing and trying to protect them. And there's no real need for circumvention because, why would you go look at something that goes against the government and your family? Because you're going to anger your father, your grandfather. Surveillance. So the internet goes both ways. You can get better access to products that you like based on your past browsing history and your shopping history. But the flip side is the government now has vast amounts of data about you, of what you like to do. And suddenly if you start veering off course and buying things that, could be suspicious if put together, governments will get very quick at responding to that. They'll be very quick at
keeping history. Disk space is cheap. You know, your credit card history, while it's very convenient, also is very convenient to give you a huge profile and to let everyone know what's going on. You know, Iran is a fairly online country compared to its neighbors. And the government will quickly learn, you know, even if Western companies don't come and help them, the blueprints are out there. They can figure it out. China is very effective at this. They don't use a lot of foreign technology. They use, you know, what's bred here is ours, and they do the same sort of things. You know, huge vacuuming data sets so that everyone has, you know, a profile in a database somewhere, so that if you become a problem, they can quickly single you out and quickly deal with, you know, the surrounding social pressures as opposed to coming to talk to you directly. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, I think we'll take 3 more questions. This gentleman's hand is up. Held his hand up for a while. This gentleman.
I'm Zachary Young with the American Foreign Policy Council. So, as was said, outflow is greatly reduced, and what news is coming out has been pushed off the headlines by Michael Jackson. Are the people finding alternate ways to communicate, or are they planning alternate strategies? What's next, and how will U.S. actions affect that?
I think that's one of the weaknesses of the new media, that even though people have been able to send all this information out, a lot of them really send it out hoping that these videos would get coverage on the mainstream media, and they get disappointed when that doesn't happen. New strategies, nothing that I know about. They continue to send videos. I've seen creative ways of using clips from protests in Iran with Michael Jackson running in the background. I think that's a pretty smart way of getting attention. Whatever it takes, you know. Protesters doing moonwalk on the street, if it works, then they'll do it. So, but other than that, the thing about new media is, I mean, most of these people who are sending information out, they're not in the West. They don't have a big network of, you know, all these media people in the West. They can't just pull a few strings and get the stories in the news. If the news coverage stops covering it because they lost interest or something else came up, then there's very little they can do other than just continuing to send the video and pictures and hoping that some of them will stick. So.
Thank you. VOA and other services, media services that are funded by the U.S. have been around for a while, and if we look at it from an experimental point of view, it's the new media that really made the impact, not VOA. And as a person coming, or I've been teaching for a while now in the Arab world, those media services are pretty transparent to the public there. Al-Hurra, for example, Al-Hurra TV is not pretty much watched in the Arab world. It doesn't capture barely 1% of the audience. So my question is, do you think those services that are being funded by U.S. taxpayer money, do you think they are now obsolete, or do you think maybe the U.S. government should use that tax money to buy, say, I don't know, iPhones for Iranians instead of millions of dollars on VOA or Al-Hurra or other services?
I think that would be incitement and interference by the U.S. government, and this is something President Obama doesn't want to do. And I respectfully disagree with you. I don't think that it was only the new media that had the effect and impact. It was the Voice of America. This was a tool, and we were on guard. We checked our sources. We used this new media, but we also, along with this new media, we had other sources. We had traditional sources. Our line of information and communication was open. We had the experts inside and outside Iran. So it was an effort by the Voice of America. And I'm not sure if I could compare Al-Hurra to the Voice of America Persian or PNN. There's a lot of competition in the Arab world, as you know better than I do. There are very, very good television stations, 24-hour TV stations. And for the Persians, we were the first ones coming, aside from the Los Angeles TVs, that maybe we should not call them televisions, but we should call them entertainment mainly. We were the first news organization, the Voice of America, that had comprehensive news with excellent technology and excellent production. We do have a competitor now that it's the BBC, and they are getting their information from the two of us. We have had an impact. One of the reasons, or one of the proof, I guess, that we have impact is the government's reaction to what we have done. We have been accused of inciting. We have been accused of creating most of these protests. So this means that people are watching us. We are giving them the information. And I think we should continue as we have. We are one of the only tools and one of the only ways and means for people to get their information. And we are getting feedback from them supporting that.
I just want to make sure I amplify that so you don't say Setar is from VOA. She's trying to advertise.
I'm not advertising. We're not in the business of propaganda.
That's exactly the point I want to make.
Thank you.
Completely true what she says. Twitter is just an infant. It's not even, it doesn't even come close. All these Twitter, YouTube, and everything in Iran doesn't even come close to the fact that VOA has had for many years. I remember when I was in Iran, it was our only source of gathering news, and it still continues to be the only source that people really rely on. It allows people to call in and talk about what's going on, and there is no character limit like Twitter. You know, the idea that, like, you know, Twitter would even come close in terms of the value of news coverage, it's not even a close question. So.
Hi, I'm Robert Gelb. I'm from Al Jazeera. I just wanted to know that since you know, there have been these traditional mainstream media outlets like CNN and NBC and ABC, and the old way of doing it is to have a bureau in a location, people on the ground, and if you get kicked out by the government, then you get kicked out. So CNN has had to rely on, you know, their Iran desk to monitor Twitter and YouTube and things like that, as a lot of them have. And as you pointed out, they've switched, you know, to devoting time to Michael Jackson because, you know, they have the pictures, in a sense. Do you think that the mainstream media has failed in the traditional way of doing work? And do you think that relying on new media too much, is there a danger that this could backfire in some way?
It's hard to blame mainstream media for getting kicked out or restricted to their offices. I mean, I wouldn't blame them for that. I think we should very much look at them as complementary media systems. Mainstream media does a lot of wonderful things. They have years of experience and expertise and money to throw at stories, and they often do very, very well. New media has its own strengths, and I think we're in a fortunate period of time where we have them both, and I think that's great.
I would say the mainstream media has been failing, I would say, for the past 10 days, and just in general, this is a trend. The great thing about new media is it's very democratic. You broadcast what you're most interested in. So I think that allows people to really talk about what they want to talk about. And if you look at it on YouTube, really, the number of hits that videos get is, you know, pretty representative of the people's taste, of the YouTube users' taste. But yeah, I mean, the media fails every time it covers one story 24 hours round the clock. You would think with cable news we could be able to cover, you know, Michael Jackson, a few other things. But unfortunately, yeah, it fails every time it focuses on a single story, to the point that the details don't even matter anymore.
I did have one. I had a final question I wanted to ask you. The role of the diaspora within new media. There was initially a lot of reports of interchange between Los Angeles. What role has the diaspora played or initially in this story, or is playing now? And what are you seeing in both Iranian experts and new media experts? What are you seeing?
Well, I think the Iranian diaspora and what's called the opposition outside the country, in the last 30 years, they've been more of an observer of what has been happening more than being really involved in the events. And if there's an angle that they see might change some of the events, they will go after that particular angle, and they would go after that particular event. There is a big difference, I think, between the opposition inside Iran and the opposition outside. The opposition inside Iran, they have pledged their allegiance to the system, and as is the case of Mr. Mousavi and the reformists. The opposition outside, they want regime change, most of them. So this is the main difference between them. But they have shown tremendous solidarity with the people inside Iran. They have also been crucial in getting the voices of these people out through videos, through pressures that they have put on international organizations, through demonstrations that they have organized around this country, in Europe and the Middle East. What we have done at VOA, we have been quite careful about this because we want to make sure that we do not put on videos or put on programs with people with agendas. So we have been covering their solidarity movements. We have had reporters even in Dubai, that was very, very close to Iran, and we report the news. So I think their role has been mainly on getting the voices out and getting the attention of NGOs and international organizations on the plight of the Iranian people.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I don't really have a lot to add to that. I think that one of the ways that I've seen people have tried to distribute the videos that come from inside of Iran, and a lot of these videos, like I mentioned during the presentation, is that a lot of them aren't on YouTube, so they're not links to YouTube. They're actual video files that are getting transmitted through emails until somebody who is within the mainstream media or the blogosphere gets that video, then they put it up on the web. And if it's not because of these chain emails that are like going among Iranians, a lot of these videos never get uploaded on the website, and that is when the FBAC really just constantly distributing this information is coming out. Also translating information, that's obviously really important because a lot of news is coming in Farsi, so translating it is a big thing.
I think it's been remarkable, and I don't know of a parallel with any country or culture anywhere in the world that you've had this cross-border alliance with people inside and outside to kind of aggregate and put information together and translate to that extent. It's been remarkable.
I'm sorry. On that note, we're going to close discussion for today, but I welcome you. Afterwards to hopefully talk with our panelists if they'll still be around. I think it's appropriate to sort of take where Robert was just leaving off. The events of the past few weeks in Iran are truly something remarkable, and at the risk of sounding melodramatic, I would even say miraculous. I don't think anyone, at least I didn't know of anyone or read of anyone that saw what was coming. And I think it says a tremendous degree about the will and the solidarity of those Iranians who actually believe that they deserve a more open future, one where there's political space where their voice can be heard. I was so encouraged today to learn that we are going to have this panel with these individuals here and the knowledge that they shared with us today. I hope that we'll have a better understanding about how new media is helping them link this so that these ambitions can be realized. Without this new media, without these web-based informations, again, the solidarity that was there in character may not have been realized, lacking these tools. I thank you very much for the time that you spent today in your preparation for this. I'm all the more enlightened for it, and I hope our audience is as well. Thank you.